Let's begin the second session where we move into the VIPASHYANA section of this text within Sutra Mahamudra. In this session, we'll begin with a meditation. We'll do the other shamatha practice, the resting and awareness practice, but we'll introduce a little bit of questioning into that. So that will mean that shamatha practice then moves into as a VIPASHYANA practice. Then a little review of some of the earlier points. Then we'll, in the first part of the VIPASHYANA section of the text, we'll look at a general presentation of ways to introduce nature of the mind. We'll do a nature of mind meditation, and then we'll begin the actual presentation of emptiness, and then question answer at the end of the session. And so what we'll do now is the shamatha practice, the second variation, the resting and awareness practice, just turning awareness in upon itself, knowing that we're aware. And we'll begin with that as a shamatha practice, but then we'll introduce a little bit of questioning into the practice, like who's releasing awareness, who's concentrating, who's resting in awareness, and so forth. And when these questions are asked, then it's not a matter of intellectually answering the questions, it's just a matter of looking to see what you see in terms of what the question is asking. So let's do that meditation now before we go into the VIPASHYANA part of the text. Find a nice comfortable posture. Let's begin. We begin as always by preparing the body. And so establishing a good posture, back straight and body relaxed. And using the out-breath to relax and release any tightness or tension in any part of the body. Allowing the breathing to settle into its natural rhythm. And with each out-breath, letting go of any thoughts that may have arisen, happily releasing them. And allowing the mind to come to rest in the present moment. Allowing the eyes to be at least partially open, resting your gaze in the space in front of you. And then simply releasing all appearances, allowing the mind to come to rest. Not doing anything at all. Simply knowing that you're aware. Resting in awareness itself. All sorts of appearances will continue to arise. Thoughts, emotions, sounds, sensations, and so on. But now pay no attention to any appearance. We're not trying to block them. Let them be there. They can be there. We're simply not interested in them. The only thing we're interested in is knowing that we're aware. And so simply rest in that experience of awareness itself. If you notice any agitation, tension, or distraction, lower the gaze, release awareness into space, releasing all appearances and relaxing completely. Who is releasing awareness into space? Don't try to intellectually answer this. Just look. Look for the agent who is releasing awareness into space. And then just rest. Resting in awareness. And if you notice that you're falling into any dullness, drowsiness, or laxity, elevate the gaze and sharpen your focus, knowing that you're aware. Who is sharpening the focus? Who's the agent doing this? Just look. And then just rest, resting in awareness. Who is resting in awareness? Who's the agent that's doing this resting? Who is resting in awareness? Just look. And again, just rest, resting in awareness. Resting in that open, spacious stillness of awareness. Completely relaxed and alert. And we can bring the meditation to a close. We are currently looking at Sutra Mahamudra. And we saw there are two approaches to that. Either you can begin with Vipassana, then Shamatha, or Shamatha, then Vipassana. And we're following that, the second approach. And so last weekend, we looked at Shamatha practice in Sutra Mahamudra. And today and tomorrow, we'll look at Vipassana practice. But just to finish off a couple of points from the Shamatha, we saw that in the text it said that Shamatha is accomplished by going through these 9 mental abidings, arising through applying those 8 antidotes to abandon the 5 faults. And these 9 mental abidings are accomplished by the 6 powers and the 4 mental engagements. And so last weekend we looked at these 9 stages that we go through, from directed attention to attentional balance, moving through these 4 powers from hearing, thinking, mindfulness, introspection, enthusiasm, familiarity, and the 4 types of mental engagement. But to actually achieve shamatha, we saw that we need to go from the 9 stage to shamatha. We need to achieve this physical and mental pliancy, this serviceability of body and mind. And so this diagram in the middle at the top here is shamatha, that the physical pliancy, it's said that when we achieve shamatha, our body feels light like cotton. And that is symbolized by the meditator flying through the sky. And then with mental pliancy, flexibility, we can turn our mind to whatever we want without any resistance. And so that's symbolized by the meditator riding on the elephant of the mind, can turn the mind to whatever we want without any resistance. And the text says that this shamatha is a source of many qualities, including things like extrasensory perception and paranormal abilities. But in particular, and the main reason we're doing this practice is to come to support a Vipassana practice of emptiness, to come to directly realize emptiness. That if we really want to have a direct insight into emptiness, we need the mind of shamatha. And if we have the mind of shamatha and have a direct realization of emptiness, we become an Arya being. And there's these 3 paths we can follow, called the Shravakas, Pratyeka Buddha, Bodhisattva path. Here in the Mahayana, we're following the Bodhisattva path to goal of enlightenment. Both the Shravaka and Pratyeka Buddha paths are on the basis of renunciation, the goal of nirvana. And so regardless of whatever path we're following to nirvana or enlightenment, then we need shamatha as a basis of coming to this direct insight into emptiness. And we saw there that last diagram, the meditator on the elephant of the mind with the sword of wisdom in their right hand, now equipped with mindfulness and introspection, we seek the correct view of emptiness. And then we come to have this union of shamatha and vipassana, observing emptiness. And then we can slowly move along the path to enlightenment. So let's have a look now at this vipassana practice of emptiness. What it is and what do we need to do? And so here in the text it says, I shall now describe how to introduce the ultimate nature of the mind based on the oral instructions of my root guru, Sangye Yeshi. So this is the Panchen Lama's root guru, who introduced him to the nature of the mind, who, assuming the guise of a saffron-robed monk, eliminated the darkness obscuring my mind. And so here, when he talks about ultimate nature of mind, here in the context of Sutra Mahamudra, as we saw earlier, it's all about emptiness as directly indicated in the 3 mothers, in the perfection of wisdom teachings, coming to realize this emptiness. Whereas in Tantra Mahamudra, we saw that ultimate nature of the mind is all about this clear light mind that is primordial wisdom of co-emergent great bliss. So this is a clear light mind, indivisible from emptiness. So depending on whether we're at Sutra or Tantra level of practice, then the way we describe ultimate nature of the mind is slightly different. Simply emptiness at Sutra, in Tantra level, it's the clear light mind, indivisible from emptiness. So here we're in Sutra, and in this section of the text, the Panchen Lama says, in regard to this, there are 2 outlines. There's a general presentation of the different ways to introduce the ultimate nature of the mind, and then presentation having extracted the essence of those instructions. And so this first outline, looking at just some examples of ways to introduce the ultimate nature of the mind that coming from the oral tradition within the Kagyu system of Mahamudra, and then extracting the essence of those instructions. What is the ultimate nature of the mind that is trying to be introduced is emptiness, of course. And so the presentation is all about emptiness. But here in the first one, then the text goes on to say, the teacher, and the teacher here is another name for Shakyamuni Buddha, historical Buddha, has said that when one realizes the mind, that is Buddha. Therefore, do not seek Buddha elsewhere. Meaning that if we want to become Buddha, achieve enlightenment, we need to realize the mind. Don't look for enlightenment elsewhere other than coming to realize the ultimate nature of the mind. And then there's a quote from Saraha, the great Indian Mahasiddha from the 8th century, one of the early originators of the Mahamudra system of practice. And he says, the mind alone is the seed of all. It is that which elaborates samsara and nirvana, and that which bestows every desired result. I prostrate to the mind that is like a wish-fulfilling jewel. Because it's the mind that is not only the source of samsara, the source of all of the suffering, but it's also the same mind that is the source of nirvana, of liberation from suffering. And so here, this word samsara, Sanskrit term, the sam prefix means thoroughly, sara means to, it's the root of to move. So it means to thoroughly move, mean to cycle life after life in a state of suffering. And so often samsara is translated as cyclic existence. Nirvana, we can divide up. Nir, the prefix means fully. Va means to blow or cool. And na means the act of. So it's the act of fully blowing out or the act of fully cooling. The act of fully blowing out means that nirvana is a state where we've fully blown out all the contaminated body and mind. The act of fully cooling is often we see in the Mahayana tradition where nirvana is symbolized by the moon. That now we are tormented by the heat of the mental afflictions, just like now we're tormented by the heat of the sun. But when we eliminate these mental afflictions, our mind is cooled, just like the light of the moon has a cooling effect. And so nirvana is a liberation from all suffering and its causes. And so then the text goes on to say, in this way, there is the great plight of samsara and the great reward of nirvana through respectively not realizing and realizing the ultimate nature of one's own mind as it is. All the sacred sutras and tantras are in complete agreement on this point. Meaning, if we don't realize ultimate nature of the mind, we don't realize emptiness, we're stuck in samsara. If we can come to realize ultimate nature of the mind, realize emptiness, then we can achieve the goal of nirvana. And so therefore, if we have this aspiration of renunciation together with this realization of emptiness, then we can be liberated, we can achieve the goal of nirvana. But if we're entering the Mahayana path through the aspiration of bodhicitta, that together with the realization of emptiness, we can go on to achieve full enlightenment, sometimes called non-abiding nirvana. And we'll look at that term later in the text. What's the difference between nirvana and enlightenment? That also comes later in the text. But the short answer is nirvana is a stepping stone to enlightenment. Then the text goes on to say ways to meditate by cutting through a basis or root to the mind. A basis or root to the mind is simply grasping to the mind as inherently existent, to exist objectively. And so what we find now in the text is 5 examples of oral instructions from the Kagyu Mahamudra tradition to introduce the ultimate nature of the mind. But just before we go into that part of the text, just a word of advice here from His Holiness Dalai Lama in his commentary, his book, which is a commentary on this text. On page 181, he says the following. He says, the Panchen Lama now explains in the auto commentary 5 traditions for meditating in order to cut down to the foundational state of the deepest nature of mind. When we look at the words with which some of the methods are expressed, we find that they do not stand up to logical debate and are not readily or clearly understandable. The words of such highly accomplished meditators as the founders of these traditions, however, are unmistaken, since they are based on valid meditation experience. This is despite the fact that the manner of the expression of some of them opens them to the danger of misinterpretation because they are imprecise and unclear. Therefore, we must take care when learning about these methods so that we do not become confused. So with that in mind, let's have a look at what the text says here. And so the first example says, some state, and so he's obviously quoting a text here, within a state of meditative equipoise, one investigates whether one's own mind is established as being inside or outside, meaning inside the body or outside the body, or as something that arises, abides, and ceases. When one sees that it is not established in any of these ways, then one has cut through a basis or route to the mind, one has been introduced to the nature of the mind, and the goal of Mahamudra is attained. And then that's to back that up is quoting a Doha, one of these spiritual songs of realization, which says, when the mind and all appearances are sought, they are not found, nor is there a searcher anywhere. Since that non-existence neither arises nor ceases in past, present, or future, it cannot transform into something else. It is the mode of abiding of natural great bliss. Thus, all appearances are Dharma Kaya. So remember that natural great bliss was the clear light mind of great bliss. And so it says, thus, all appearances are Dharmakaya. Dharmakaya being the enlightened mind. So here there's a number of quotes, including Dharmakaya and so forth. So I thought it might be helpful to understand, to look a little bit, what do we mean by Dharmakaya? And so here we can talk about the four kayas, which are often talked about as the four bodies of a Buddha. But that word body can be a bit misleading because we're not talking about like a body in the sense of like a physical body, but more like four aspects of a Buddha. And so here we have Dharmakaya, which is a Sanskrit word, which is often translated into English as truth body. And we achieve this from wisdom, through the wisdom of emptiness in particular. And that Dharmakaya can be further subdivided into what's called the Svabhavika Kaya, which often is translated as the nature truth body, and then the Jnana Dharmakaya, the wisdom truth body. Very simply here then, the Svabhavika Kaya, the nature truth body, is the nature of the Dharmakaya, which is emptiness. So it's the emptiness of the Dharmakaya, and the Jnana Dharmakaya being the wisdom truth body, the actual Dharmakaya. But then we can also talk about, so that's the enlightened mind, but then the enlightened mind manifests in the world, and that is the Rupakaya or form body. And that is attained through the merit. So remember, there's two wings of practice of wisdom and merit, two accumulations. So the accumulation of wisdom is mainly for achieving Dharmakaya. The accumulation of merit is mainly for achieving the Rupakaya. And how the enlightened mind manifests at two levels, there's what's called Sambhogakaya, often translated into as complete enjoyment body. And that is a very subtle manifestation of the enlightened mind. And that is so subtle that only highly realized practitioners can perceive this type of manifestation. And it's said that only Arya Bodhisattvas, a bodhisattva who's had a direct realization of emptiness, their mind is purified enough to be able to directly perceive this form of a Buddha, of a Sambhogakaya. Whereas a Nirmanakaya, an emanation body, can be seen by an ordinary practitioner. And sometimes these four kayas are condensed to two kayas, then it's just Dharmakaya and Rupakaya. And very commonly, particularly in the Mahamudra Dzogchen traditions, they talk about the three kayas. And the three kayas then are simply Dharmakaya, and then the Rupakaya is divided up into Sambhogakaya, Nirmanakaya. So this is what we often find in the texts. And so here, when we see these quotes about Dharmakaya, we're simply talking about the enlightened mind. And so then we go to the second tradition, where it says, others state, one searches for the mind within the parts of one's own body, from the crown of the head to the soles of the feet. So where is the mind in the body? And then it says, when one sees that it is not established as being any of these parts, that it is not established in any way as a physical entity, having a shape, color, and so forth, then one sees the nature of the mind. And to back that up, there's a quote from Shang Rinpoche, a great Tibetan master in the Kagyu Mahamudra tradition, who says, the nature of one's own mind is the seed of all. From the very beginning, it is not different from the minds of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. It appears as Dharmakaya. It is not matter, and it is clear by nature. Not established as a functioning thing, It has no color or size. So it seems from this quotes here, it seems like if we come to search for the mind and we come to see that the mind, for example, has no color and shape, that's realizing nature of mind. Well, that seems pretty easy. Is realizing that the mind is not physical, has no color and shape. Is that a realization of the nature of the mind? So again, as His Holiness mentioned, we have to be a little bit careful here with these instructions and understand them correctly. So to understand these instructions here and to not misunderstand what's being said, again, let's go to His Holiness's commentary and see what he says about this particular point here. So this is on page 183, and he says the following. He says, surely no one would consider simply mind's absence of shape or color due to its not being established as any form of physical phenomena as mind's deepest nature. This manner of expression then is intended to lead us to a deeper, more profound understanding, and it is certainly not saying, as the words literally imply, that the deepest nature of the mind is its lack of color or shape. As the root or starting place, however, for being led in stages to the understanding that mind by nature is devoid of true inherent findable existence, we first look for where the mind might be. Is it somewhere inside or outside our body? Is it any of the parts of our body from the crown of our head to the tips of our toes? Can we see anything that could be mind? These then are merely stages in a meditation method that ultimately leads to understanding the abiding nature of the mind to be only an extinction of concrete, findable, true, and inherent existence. So that's very important to understand. So these ways of searching for the mind can lead us to realizing the empty nature of the mind. Again, simply realizing the mind is not physical or has no color and shape is not a realization of emptiness of the mind. Then the third tradition says, still others state, without dwelling in the past or anticipating the future, rest serenely in a state of present awareness, fresh and uncontrived. So simply resting in awareness, which we saw was actually these sorts of instructions we saw in the shamatha section of this text. And remember, at the end of the shamatha section of this text, the Panchen Lama said that the meditators of his day were saying these sorts of instructions could lead you to put Buddhahood in the palm of your hand. And so, but he was saying that these instructions are excellent instructions for achieving shamatha. But here we see them in the Vipasshyana section of text. So again, these instructions lead us towards realizing the empty nature of the mind. But this text then goes on to say, in this way, the nature of the mind will be nakedly and directly seen. At that time, one has cut through a basis or root to the mind and has been introduced to the nature of the mind. So again, if we just rest in the present state of awareness, fresh and uncontrived means without conceptual thought, construction. If we just rest there, then we could cut through to realize the empty nature of the mind. And so here, backing up that claim, a quote from Saraha says, rest in a fresh, uncontrived and relaxed manner. Another quote from a great yogi, Tibetan yogi in the Mahamudra tradition, Mahasiddha Langripa Padma Dorje. He says, when resting in an uncontrived and fresh manner, realization dawns. When sustaining this like the flow of a river, it will dawn even more fully. You, the yogi, thoroughly abandon all signs of fixation, meaning abandon all grasping, and be constantly in meditative equipoise. So that's the third tradition. In, I think, the text that you actually have, I only put 3 traditions in there to simplify, but I think for the purpose of this weekend retreat, I've added the other 2 that come in the more extensive version. So let's have a look at those 2 as well. And the 4th one says, others state, no matter what type of objects dawn in the mind, such as visual forms or sounds, and also no matter what type of thoughts dawn in the mind, such as virtuous or non-virtuous, neither suppress nor pursue them even slightly. By looking nakedly at their nature, they all vanish, and then rest in the vivid, pure vacuity that cannot be in any way identified. Such seeing is a realization of the ultimate nature, and one has been introduced to the nature of the mind. Again, these instructions were very similar to the shamatha instructions we saw before earlier in the text. But here it's saying that simply by doing that, we'll realize the nature of the mind. So it could, just resting and observing those mental events, if we're intuitive and sharp and clear enough, it could lead us to realize the nature of the mind. Because here is quoting from Tilopa's Ganges Mahamudra, very famous Mahamudra text from Indian master Tilopa. He says, if you desire to realize the meaning beyond concepts with nothing to be done, cut through a basis or route to your own mind and rest nakedly in awareness. Allow the water stained by conceptions to become clear and rest naturally without suppressing or pursuing appearances. Without abandoning and without grasping is Mahamudra. And then the fifth example from the Kagyu Mahamudra tradition is also many others state. No matter what type of discursive thoughts arise, focus on them without making them vanish. And in addition to that, by allowing them to become more expansive, they will become self-liberated. Thus, their dawning and liberation will be simultaneous. However many thoughts there are that many enumerations of the Dharmakaya. And so again, quoting from this Lama Shang, is a great Tibetan yogi in the Kagyu tradition, says, when settling in such a state and discursive thoughts suddenly arise, they are from the clear light Dharmakaya. Do not think that they are something else. Thus, the proliferation of discursive thoughts is emptiness emanating from emptiness, Dharmakaya emanating from Dharmakaya, and unity emanating from unity. So these, again, are all examples of how ultimate nature of the mind is being introduced in the oral Mahamudra tradition, Kagyu. And so again, in these instructions, particularly if we have a firm basis in shamatha vipassana, these sorts of instructions can really help us to cut through and realize the nature of the mind. And so before we go on to the emptiness presentation, let's do a meditation based on some of these instructions we saw here from the oral Kagyu Mahamudra tradition. So I've just picked out a few points here that we'll use as a basis for a meditation. And that is, one searches for the mind within the parts of one's own body, from the crown of the head to the soles of the feet. Investigate whether one's own mind is established as being inside or outside. Is it established in any way as having a shape, color, and so forth? And so we're going to use this as the basis of our Vipassana practice, and we'll see how we go. See if we can come to some little bit of an insight into the nature of our own mind. Find a nice, comfortable posture. Let's begin that meditation. Setting the body into a state of relaxation, stillness, and vigilance. And relaxing more deeply with each out-breath. allowing the breathing to settle into its natural rhythm. And setting the mind in a state of ease and relaxation. Simply allowing the mind to come to rest in the stillness of the present moment. Allowing the mind to remain relaxed, still, and clear. And with the eyes at least partially open, resting your gaze in the space in front of you. And releasing all appearances. Allowing the mind to come to rest. And resting in the experience of awareness itself. And so simply resting in awareness itself, resting in the mind itself. The awareness that you're resting in, where is it located? Is awareness inside the body? Don't try to intellectually answer this. Just look. Is awareness inside the body? Look in every part of the body. Is the awareness there? Is awareness inside the head? Look closely. Is awareness outside the body? Does awareness have a particular shape or color? Look closely. Does awareness have a particular size? Is it very small? Is it very large? Again, look closely. Does awareness have a center? Does awareness have a physical limit, an edge, a boundary? Look closely. Is there anything outside of awareness? and then release all investigation and just rest. Resting in awareness. Resting in that open, spacious stillness of awareness. And we can bring the meditation to a close. And that brings us to the second part of the VIPASHYANA section of the text, and that is a presentation having extracted the essence of those instructions. The essence of those instructions is what is the nature of the mind that all of those instructions are trying to lead us to. And so here it begins with a quote in a sutra called the Sutra Requested by Pala, which says, due to not knowing the way in which things are empty, peaceful, and unproduced, migrators wander. The teacher, in other words, Shakyamuni Buddha, possessing compassion for them, caused them to enter by skillful methods and hundreds of reasonings. And so here we see in this quote what are called the three doors of liberation. And the three doors of liberation are emptiness, signlessness, and wishlessness. And these are a door to liberation because they're all a realization of emptiness, and that will lead us to liberation. So it's a door to liberation. But each one is from a slightly different perspective. So the door of liberation of emptiness, which is due to not knowing the way in which things are empty, is talking about the things themselves, the entity of the things, that things are empty of inherent existence. Whereas signlessness is looking at things from the perspective of causes. Is anything inherently produced? And so here it says they are peaceful, which means pacified, which means they're pacified of being inherently produced, inherently existent causes. And wishlessness is from the perspective of results. Do things inherently produce something? And so the answer is that they're unproduced, means nothing is inherently produced. There's no inherently existent results that are produced. So these three doors of liberation are realizing emptiness from three perspectives, from the thing itself, from the causes, from the results. They all lead to the same goal of liberation. That's why they're called the three doors of liberation. And then the Panchanama comments on that quote. He says, thus it is taught that due to not knowing the profound emptiness, the way in which things are selflessness, migrators wander in samsara. The teacher who possesses great compassion for those who wander in samsara, in order to liberate them from samsara, cause them to enter the path of realizing selflessness directly and indirectly by skillful methods for realizing selflessness and hundreds of reasonings for determining selflessness. And so here we see two words, emptiness and selflessness. Are they the same thing? That depends on the philosophical system. When we see the word selflessness or no self, then in the philosophical systems in Buddhism, the Vaibhashika, Sautrantika, and Chittamatra philosophical systems, no self or selflessness means no autonomous self. Whereas in the Madhyamika philosophical system, the one we're following here, and to sort of narrow that down, when I say Madhyamika, I'm really talking about the Prasangika school within Madhyamika. So within Madhyamika philosophical system, there are two sub-schools, what's called Prasangika and Svatantrika. But for the purposes of simplification here, whenever I use the word Madhyamika, I'm talking about the Prasangika understanding. And so in Prasangika or in Madhyamika, when we say no self or selflessness, we're talking about no inherently existent self. Meaning that in Madhyamika philosophical system, the one we're following here is selflessness and emptiness are equivalent. They mean the same thing, no inherent existence. Then when we talk about the word emptiness, then in the first two schools, Vaibhashika, Sautrantika, the term's not really used. They just talk about no autonomous self. Whereas in the Chittamatra philosophical system, not only do they talk about no self, no autonomous self, but they also use the word emptiness. But here in Chittamatra school, when they use the word emptiness, they mean that there's no external world, that the world is empty of being external to us. Chittamatra meaning mind only. So their assertion is that there's no external physical world. The world is internal to the mind. And so that is what emptiness means for them, no external world. Whereas here in Madhyamika, again, emptiness means no inherently existent self, no inherently existent phenomena. Nothing inherently exists. So here in this text, these words, emptiness and selflessness, can be used interchangeably. And the text goes on to say, similarly, as said by Master Shantideva, all these branches were taught by the subduer for the sake of wisdom. And so the branches can mean two things. It can either mean the branches as in the lower philosophical systems of no autonomous self leading to this idea of emptiness, but it also can mean that within Madhyamika, the branches are the first five perfections, that those first five perfections of generosity, ethics, patience, joy, effort, concentration, they also lead us to the sixth perfection, which is the perfection of wisdom, which is the wisdom of emptiness. And so this is what all of the various teachings, whether we're talking not Madhyamika, even in the Madhyamika system, they're all leading to this wisdom of emptiness. And so that's all I wanted to cover as a brief introduction, and we'll go on in the next session to talk a lot more about this view of emptiness. So that was just the start. We're going to spend the rest of today and tomorrow looking at this view of emptiness and how to meditate on that in terms of looking for the person, but also nature of mind. So any questions now, again, put them in the chat and I'll try to answer your questions as best as I can. So we've got plenty of time for questions. I've got 15 minutes before a scheduled break. So fire away with the questions.
Currently, there's nothing in the chat, but I actually had a question when I saw this presentation.
Sure.
Maybe I'm way off here, but when you talked about the Dharmakaya, it sounded to me a bit like the clear light mind. Is there any connection or?
Yeah. Yes, I mean, again, it depends whether you are talking sutra or tantra level, because also in Mahayana sutra level, we talk about light mind, we talk about the kayas, but at sutra level, there's not really any sort of discussion so much about the very subtle mind, just the subtle mind. But here, in the context of Mahamudra, certainly in Tantra Mahamudra, then as we saw that I think one of the quotes earlier said that the mind is that which elaborates all of samsara and nirvana. And all appearances are dharmakaya. And so certainly within Mahamudra and Dzogchen and in Tantra practice in general, then everything that is arising from Dharmakaya, from the very subtle clear light mind. And so we can even say that, you know, again, when we talk about Buddha nature, again, if we talk sutra level, then often Buddha nature just means the emptiness of our mind, the mind we have now. But if we're talking Mahamudra, Dzogchen, or Tantra, then Buddha nature really is the same as clear light mind. That there's always, it's even at that level, it's because everything's arising from that, then the perspective is very different than from the sutra level. Because in the sutra level, when we talk about achieving enlightenment, we have the perspective of, you know, we need to engage in these 6 perfections practices. We need to create the causes. We need to put a lot of effort to achieve that goal of enlightenment. So Buddha nature is the potential for enlightenment. Whereas here in Mahamudra, Dzogchen, and in Tantra in general, then because we're really talking about at the deepest level the clear light mind, then we can say that there's already a Buddha within, that it's not a matter of achieving enlightenment, it's a matter of discovering the clear light mind that is already there. So we can talk about the ground Dharmakaya. The ground Dharmakaya is the Dharmakaya that is already present within ourselves. Again, we're talking perspective now, Tantra, not Sutra. There's already that Dharmakaya within, the ground, what's called the ground Dharmakaya. And what we need to do is to strip away all of the things that stop us from seeing that clear light mind. And so when we have an insight into nature of mind, again, insight nature of mind in terms of an insight into clear light mind, then that's called the path Dharmakaya, the path. And then the resultant Dharmakaya is when all of that is stripped away. So again, it really depends a little bit whether we're talking sutra or tantra, how we talk about that in terms of Dharmakaya, in terms of nature of mind and so forth. So we need to be a little bit careful not to mix the systems together, because then we really get confused. And on the surface, it seems like they're actually contradictory, but they're just 2 different perspectives. One is from the perspective of the clear light mind, and one is from the subtle mind perspective. And from our subtle mind perspective, we're an ordinary sentient being. No way are we a Buddha. We have to do a lot of work to achieve that goal. But if we're talking from the perspective of clear light mind, that's not something to achieve. It's already there. And so therefore, you know, that's how we speak in terms of Tantra. So we just have to understand that, otherwise we come up with, we end up with some very strange ideas if we don't appreciate that.
Great, thanks. Few questions in the chat now. Sure. Okay, where did it start? Okay, question from Dana. When you ask if there is anything outside of awareness, what do you mean? We are not aware of everything, but as I understand, we have a potential to be aware. So how do you refer to that?
There's a difference between asking, is there anything physically outside of awareness, versus are there things that we don't know about? So one is a sort of a conventional level question, like what do we know about? But here in Vipassana, we're not so much interested in what we conventionally know and what we don't know, you know. But what we're interested in Vipassana is how things exist, not what exists. I mean, there are plenty of things that exist that we don't know about, but that's not really so relevant in this context. I mean, it may be relevant in other contexts, but here in Vipassana, what's relevant is how does the mind exist? And so what these questions were aiming at was to come to an insight into the ultimate nature of the mind. And one avenue we saw here is that we can ask, like, is there a color, shape, and so forth. And another one is, how big is the mind, and is there anything that's physically outside of awareness? So there may be, we may come to the insight that actually awareness is limitless, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we know everything. So that's another question. That's a different question. We're not asking that question, do we know everything? We're just asking in terms of how we grasp onto the mind now, because often, and this is based a lot on some fields of modern science, which basically equates the mind to the brain. And we sort of tend to believe that. And so then, if you say, where's the mind located? We will say, well, it's inside the head because that's where the brain is, But what we're doing in this practice is not just accepting belief systems. We're looking through our own experience. And so what is our experience telling us? Is our experience that actually my experience is that my awareness is inside my head, and that everything outside my body is outside of my awareness? Is that my experience or not? And so that's what these questions are trying to break down, is experientially, is the things outside of my body, the things we experience, are they outside of my awareness? Is it somehow that they enter into my awareness inside my head? Is that our experience or not? And so again, with these sorts of Vipassana questions, using this approach, there's no right or wrong answer. The answer is, what do you experience? What do you observe? And so we are to, using the sharp, investigative mind of shamatha, with a sharp, clear mind, we investigate and see what we see. And then we're coming to penetrate the ultimate nature of mind. But more will come a bit more in the text. So I think maybe a couple more questions and then we'll take a break.
Yes, we have a couple more. Thanks for that answer. It was very helpful.
Sure.
So Liora asks, how come that the Tantrika and the Vaibhashika don't talk about emptiness, while the Buddha has mentioned emptiness in the sutras like the Heart Sutra?
Yeah. The Heart Sutra is the second turning of the wheel, and that is the basis of the Mahayana tradition, the Sanskrit texts, perfection of wisdom teachings. So the Vaibhashika and Sautantrika are based on the first turning of the wheel teachings, Four Noble Truths teachings, which are the text we find in the Theravada tradition. So generally, certainly not explicitly, you won't really see the word emptiness in those texts. And those are the Vaibhashika and Sautantrika philosophical systems come out of those teachings. They're not coming out of the perfection of wisdom teachings. And so that's the difference. Whereas the Madhyamika philosophical system is based on the perfection of wisdom teachings. The Chittamantra system, philosophical system, is based on what's called the third turning of the wheel teaching, so another set of teachings. And so that's why we have these different philosophical systems. And so in the example in the Four Noble Truths and so forth, there's not really any talk about emptiness. It's about no self, releasing, grasping to autonomous self. And so that's why we have those differences in terms of terminology and in terms of what those terms actually mean.
Thanks. And next question from Dro. The question is, just to be sure, when we use the word awareness in the meditation, it has the same meaning as the daily definition? If so...
As the what definition?
When we use the word awareness in meditation, does it have the same meaning as the regular definition of awareness? I'm not sure, I think.
Well, that's the tricky question, is the regular definition of awareness. This is part of the confusion we find within Mahayana in general, but specifically within Tibetan Buddhism, with the different schools, the Gelug, Kagyu, Nyingma, and so forth. This word awareness can mean many different things. Very simply, we saw the definition of mind is the mind has clarity and awareness. And so there the word awareness is just used in terms of the knowing capacity of the mind, that the mind is aware, it knows. And when we're speaking here, when in the meditation, when I talk about resting in awareness, I'm using the term awareness very generally, meaning that resting in awareness, resting in the mind, resting in consciousness mean exactly the same thing. However, we need to be careful because in Mahamudra and Dzogchen, particularly in Dzogchen, in the Kagyu and Nyingma, is when they use the word awareness, they often are using it in a very specific way. Often it's synonymous because the word awareness in Tibetan is Rikpa. And in Dzogchen, Rikpa is another name for clear light mind, for very subtle mind. So often in those traditions, when we see the word awareness, it means clear light mind. It doesn't mean just mind in general. So again, we have to be very careful when we see this word awareness, the context it's used in to understand what the meaning is. But here, when I'm using it in these sort of practices by saying rest in awareness, I'm just saying rest in the mind, our coarse mind that's active now. So I'm using it in a very general sense.
Okay, thanks. There's a second part to this question from Dro, and it reads, when we say resting in awareness, do we mean that we should focus on what we are currently aware of?
Yeah, so resting in awareness, remember, is where we're turning awareness in upon itself. So in that practice, we're not focusing on any appearances that appear in awareness. I mean, things will still appear. There'll still be thoughts, emotions, sounds, sensations. All those appearances will continue to arise. But resting in awareness is we're not interested in any of the appearances. We're turning awareness in upon itself and simply knowing that we're aware. So we're focusing on that aspect of experience, just the awareness itself, not the appearances arising in awareness. We're not trying to block them or get rid of them, but we're just not paying attention to them, that's all. Any more questions? Otherwise, we can take a break there.
Yes, there is just one last question.
Okay, we'll take this question and then we'll take a break.
Sure. So the question is from Dana, and she says, thanks you for your answer about awareness that helped me understand more about the practice. My experience was that awareness is everywhere, in and outside of my body, and that I can change its focus or center all the time. I felt like I can focus on the sensation in my leg or move it to sounds to my left. Okay. I was wondering if I'm thinking of something that's going on 30 kilometers from me, what does it mean from awareness point of view?
Exactly. Very good question. And we're going to explore this a little bit further. I think tomorrow or even on Sunday, we're going to do another one of these Vipasshyana practices, and we're going to start to explore something like that. But just the short answer is, and maybe if you want, you can reflect on this in the coming days, is awareness located in physical space, or is physical space located in awareness? Not think about that, meaning don't intellectualize that, but look, go into meditation and look, what is your experience? Is your experience that awareness is located somewhere in physical space, or is your experience that physical space is actually located in awareness? Look for that and see what you see. Okay, let's leave it there. And we'll come back in 30 minutes, have a break. And then the next session, we'll really start to look a bit more deeply at this view of emptiness, particularly in terms of the flip side, that is the self-grasping mind, and how the self-grasping mind is the root of all of our mental afflictions and suffering. And this is why we're stuck in samsara, and we need to overcome this self-grasping to achieve liberation. So there's a lot of talk about self-grasping in the next session. So let's take a break, come back in 30 minutes for the third and last session today.